Hi, everybody. We are Karen Deppa and Mike Donahue of Pilot Light Resilience Resources. Welcome to our presentation, which we are calling Self-Care Activities, Resilient Skills for First Responders. Want to wish a happy Father's Day weekend to all you dads out there, and happy Juneteenth National Independence Day, our newest federal holiday. Thanks to all of you for joining us this afternoon and those who join in the future, and a very big thanks to the Maryland State Firemen's Association for giving us the opportunity to present today. Mike and I look forward to sharing some information about how resilience shows up in the emergency responder community, and to give you some tools that you can use to take care of yourself during what remains of COVID times, and then as we transition back to quote unquote more normal times.
Karen, that's a good point. I'm glad you did the quote unquote with normal times. It's important. I want to point out that what is normal for emergency workers isn't necessarily normal for others. We live in the world of crisis management, and it comes with heightened stress levels. That environment tends to rub off on us and affects our worldview, and may I say, not always for the best.
So why is self-care so important? Finding the time on a regular basis to give yourself what you need intellectually, emotionally, physically, spiritually, and socially will allow you to better adapt to changes in your environment, to build strong relationships, and to recover from setbacks. In other words, to be resilient.
Yeah. How does this relate to our universe? As emergency responders, self-care will enable you to be in a position to better support those around you and those who are in need. There's an old adage that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. That is what this presentation is about. What do you do for self-care? Or in other words, what do you do to decompress, to absorb the shocks and disappointments that are common in this industry? The SIDS death you can't bring back, or the old couple who lost their home and 50 years worth of memory. Maybe it's a hobby. Maybe it's spending time with your family, exercise, or simply quiet, reflective time by yourself.
These things that you do to take care of yourself contribute to resilient responses. So our objective for today is to guide you through the creation of 3 tools for your self-care toolbox to help you strengthen your resilience. We'll start by talking about what resilience is, and then we'll review the 3 pillars of resilience that research shows are most important to the emergency response community. Next, we'll guide you through 3 activities to help you create personalized tools to strengthen each of the 3 pillars of resilience. These tools will be yours to use and practice after you leave this workshop to strengthen your resilient responses.
I should point out, Karen, that today's material is just a sampling of the resilience practices. There's a lot of science that goes on behind this, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. For our audience also, please use the chat function to provide comments if you do not want to speak.
Okay. Before we get started, we wanted to tell you a little bit about ourselves. In fact, I'm dedicating this workshop to my dad, Tony Fernicola, who passed away a little over 17 years ago, which was the last time the cicadas invaded our area. All the time that I was growing up in New Jersey, my dad was a volunteer firefighter. I still remember the sounds of the plectron radio receiver going off in his bedroom to alert him to a call. And with that, there was the blaring siren of the firehouse right around the corner, followed by the screech of Dad's tires in the driveway as he responded. My dad suffered from depression for most of his adult life, and I don't know if it was related to his experiences as a volunteer or not, but I do know that I felt really helpless to do anything else to ease his pain and suffering. Meanwhile, throughout my career, I worked with firefighters on the national, state, and local levels, primarily on fire prevention advocacy with the National Association of State Fire Marshals. In 2015, I got my master's in applied positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, and that's where I brought my desire to help address behavioral health issues together with my love and respect for the fire rescue services that I'd spent my career working with and whose culture I'd been exposed to growing up. An expanded version of my master's thesis has been published as a Springer Briefs and Fire ebook called Resilience Training for Firefighters: An Approach to Prevent Behavioral Health Problems. I live in Maryland now, with my husband on a farm that includes a flock of sheep, a Sicilian donkey, draft horses, cats, fish, and lots of frogs that make a racket on a warm summer's evening. Mike and I set up Pilot Light Resilience Resources to work on sharing the science and skills of resilience with the emergency response community. Mike, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, I started as a volunteer in Prince George's County when I was 16 years old, following in my dad's footsteps. Dad evidently set the tone, as I come from a family of firefighters now. My brother worked in DC, and my brother-in-law is still on the job in Anne Arundel County. Both also started as volunteers. My significant other is still active in Prince George's, so she no longer rides apparatus. In 1977, I was hired into what would become the Montgomery County Fire and Rescue Service, where I served for 35 years. I started as a backstep flunky and retired as an assistant chief. I spent the last 10 years of my career responsible for the fire marshal's office, and there I developed a strong appreciation for prevention. As important as my active duty time was in the fire service, I have also been a lifelong student of the profession, culminating in a PhD in fire and emergency management and as a contract instructor at the National Fire Academy, which I really enjoy. So how did I get to meet Karen? I became interested in the psychological impacts on firefighters after having two good friends cycle through my office on light duty before retiring with debilitating psychological injuries. I met Karen through committee work, and it became quite easy for her to convince me to play a part in helping prevent such injuries. You're probably well aware that firefighters and police share the distinction of having the most stressful occupations in America, along with active duty military and airline pilots. With the advent of COVID, a host of other professions have joined in the exacerbated stress levels of providing care, delivering a public service, and interacting with the public. We're familiar with emergency responders, but now we see more of the medical profession getting involved, and most recently, airline attendants. That just seems to be a stress level that's out of control there. And then there's the other service providers who have interact with the public in close proximity and with coworkers during the worst of the pandemic. Along with heightened stress comes the whole spectrum of behavioral problems. These include withdrawal, unfocused anger, drug and alcohol abuse, sleeplessness, and many others. On the job front, we see tardiness, sick leave abuse, increased injury rates, safety failures, burnout, and many more issues. The cool thing about learning resilience skills is that when they are practiced consistently, they can serve as a buffer between you and the stress experienced on not only critical incidents that have a big impact all at once, but also on those day-to-day annoyances, those taxi runs that you wind up making that at 2 o'clock in the morning when you'd rather be sleeping. Those day-to-day annoyances wear us down little by little over the course of a career.
Training in resilience is intended to help ward off behavioral health problems from starting in the first place, also to keep problems that have surfaced from getting worse, and to help keep normal human responses to stress and adversity from turning into responses that limit our ability to function effectively and productively. Resilience skill building adds a proactive element to supplement the programs that already exist to help address and treat behavioral health problems once they arise. All of these approaches are part of a necessary spectrum to provide and treat psychological distress. So what do we mean when we talk about resilience? How do you define resilience? Please put your responses into the chat.
Yeah, I know every firefighter EMS provider out there has an opinion because I've heard plenty of them over the course of my career. So if you'd like to share with, we'd really like to hear what you have to say.
Anyone?
Okay.
Well, look, psychological resilience. Oh, there's somebody. The ability to grow from adversity. Excellent. The ability to take the encounters you have had and using coping mechanisms.
Very good.
Very good. All right. Psychological resilience does have a range of definitions. Some of them include the capacity to respond to a stressful circumstance in adaptive ways. There's someone that says the ability to bounce back through coping mechanisms, the ability to recover after a significant adversity or trauma, return to quote unquote normal after adversity, and the ability to adapt to new and challenging situations. And these various definitions are not incompatible, but I want to share the definition that we like to use. And that is the capacity of individuals to respond in healthy and productive ways when faced with setbacks, adversity, and trauma.
Okay. I want to point out something about this is that we always talk about returning to normal. And we have to be careful that returning to normal doesn't mean we go back to the way things are, because things will never be back the way they were. It's always bouncing forward. We need to project forward, not look behind. Indeed, we are looking for a new normal that takes into account the changes forced by the event or events that have culminated over our career.
Right. So we all have the capacity to be resilient and to learn skills that increase our resilience. But depending on the environment that we're in at a given time, our relationship with others who are involved, and the inner resources that we bring to the circumstances, we can be resilient in one situation, but not in another. Or we can respond to the exact same situation differently, depending on that particular mix of factors and how it changes from one day to the next.
We all sometimes have trouble being resilient. That's because we're all human. You know, there's no shame in sometimes needing assistance to deal with our vulnerabilities. You know, when I got hired, when I joined as a volunteer, nobody issued me blue leotards and a red cape with a big red S on it. You know, we're simply not Superman or Superwomen, as the case may be. Especially these days, pressure comes at us from all different angles: the work front, the home front, even our leisure activities. By allowing ourselves to feel vulnerable with those who make us feel safe is difficult, but absolutely crucial to behavior health and wellness.
Mm-hmm. And learning how to be resilient is a matter of self-awareness. Recognizing patterns of unhealthy, unproductive thoughts and actions is a first step toward changing your responses to be more productive and more healthy.
Okay, think of it this way: resilience is a healthy psychological response to a stress event, much the same as we learn how to apply pressure to an uncontrolled bleed or opening an airway when a patient is not breathing, or laying out to ensure a water source without taking conscious time to think about what needs to be done. We take these steps automatically. These actions become muscle memory. The same applies to resilience. Once you practice these skills, they become muscle memory and they automatically kick in. Like anything else we want to become good at, it is important to practice resilient thinking and resilient behaviors. We do so in the fire and emergency services. We practice and train, practice and train, and practice and train. And when we take care of ourselves this way, we're going to be better positioned to take care of others in need, which is what we do.
Okay, so this is a brief review of information we covered. If you saw last year's presentation, it'll be a review for you and important new information for those who didn't see it. Research has identified 3 main pillars of resilience in the emergency response community, and these represent the protective factors that, when they are developed and practiced, foster resilient thinking and behaviors. We are going to go over each of these in turn. The first pillar of resilience has to do with how we think about and interpret events in our world, and we call this FORT thinking. FORT stands for flexible, optimistic, realistic, and thorough. When we practice FORT thinking, we are building a fort, if you will, to help protect us against adversity. Now I'll explain a little bit more about what each letter in the word FORT stands for.
Karen, before we get into those details on FORT thinking, let me say this is not about slapping a happy face on every situation. There is such a thing as too much and extreme inauthentic optimism. This is also a thinking trap and may be known as magnifying. This presentation is about FORT, a realistic approach and alternatives, acknowledging what is real.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Important point. So F in FORT is for flexible. Anytime we find ourselves reacting consistently in a particular style of thinking or way of explaining the things that happen in our world, we need to remind ourselves to be more flexible so that we don't fall into unproductive patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting.
So the key question here is, how can I think about this in a different way? For me, a perfect example is triage. While we'd like to save everyone, sometimes the resources are simply not there, and you must ration the available resources on those with the greatest chance of survival. Flexibility allows us to ration our personal resources to deal with the stressor events we face during the time that we provide these public services.
Okay. O is for optimistic. Optimistic thinking is one of the key drivers of resilient behavior. The ability to see the positive aspects of situations, benefits, and options enables us to move forward, to find solutions, to seek support if we need it, and to have hope. Optimism allows us to feel a sense of control over the things we have control over while being able to let go of the things that we don't have control over.
Okay. We've also often heard the term about finding a silver lining. So instead of looking at what was lost, why don't we change our perspective to see what was saved? You know, we see this argument played out all the time when we're doing fire loss reports, and we always calculate how much damage there was. We never bother to calculate how much savings there were. What did we do right? And that's the important part.
Okay. And R is for realistic. As Mike said a minute ago, optimistic thinking is not blind optimism. Extreme optimism can actually hurt us by blinding us to the realities of a situation. Realistic optimism, on the other hand, lets you take negative events into account, but not be paralyzed by them. It lets you see opportunities and reasons to hope when the going gets tough.
Yeah. Again, a key consideration here, we must remember that we don't own any of the problems we respond to. We're simply there to help. They're not our problems. We're there to help.
Right. And T is for thorough, making sure that you haven't missed any of the details, thinking through the different ways you can interpret an event. The thing is, when you see that an event can be interpreted in a variety of ways, you realize that you have a choice about which interpretation you go with. And you don't necessarily have to go with the first interpretation that pops into your head in the urgency of the moment.
I think the key question again is what is really going on here? And for this, I am reminded of an incident early in my career when we handled a service call to assist a citizen with an unknown odor. It was only after my crew developed severe headaches and repeated questioning of the homeowner that we found out he had sprayed undiluted pesticides throughout his house to get rid of a flea problem. Needless to say, a service call turned into a hazmat incident. We wound up removing every square inch of carpet in that man's house, and 3 of us were transported for pesticide poisoning. It was not a good day.
Dang. Yeah, and then the key question for thorough thinking is what other factors may have contributed to this situation. Okay, all right. Before we move on to the next pillar of resilience, anybody have any questions? If so, please put them in the chat. All right. The second pillar of resilience is coping capacity. When our coping capacity is strong, we have the confidence to be able to deal with stressful and adverse situations that we face at home, at work, in any aspect of our lives. Coping capacity is the ability to marshal not only our internal, but also external resources that are available to us to deal with and manage a stressful event.
Coping capacity is rooted in self-efficacy, or the belief in ourselves that we can overcome adverse situations we face. So what are some of the internal resources that we have available to us? Faith, our health, our attitude, our resolution, objectivity. And what about external resources we have available? How about time in the gym, our hobbies, our spouse or significant other, our friends, and our shift mates? This leads us to the third pillar of social support.
Okay. Social support refers to the relationships we have with coworkers, supervisors, family, friends, and others with whom we interact in our community. The people that we can call on to provide support and have our back in times of adversity. There is a rich body of research indicating that positive and high quality social support can improve our resilience to stress and is a protective factor against developing trauma-related disorders and negative psychological effects from stress.
In the emergency services, this often presents a double-edged sword. I'm sure you all are aware of that, but it's worth saying. Our shifts work together and often play together. We attend each other's grand events, such as weddings and birthday parties. But on the other hand, it is well known that everybody gets a turn in the barrel. And those days can be very wicked indeed. Trust me, we've all been there. We tend to shortchange ourselves by not looking outside our profession also. The people outside the fire service or emergency medical services or any of the other emergency services have just as much to offer us in terms of social support. by constantly being in the echo chamber of fire, EMS, and police. Also, we forget that others face difficulty in their lives. You're not alone. We're all dealing with this muck together. The camaraderie is wonderful, but it can also keep us from developing and strengthening our relationships outside of the fire station. And it's all a matter of maintaining balance in our lives.
Okay. The research tells us how these three pillars work together to increase resilient responses. So if you look at this graphic, the greater your level of coping capacity, the more likely that forward thinking and social support will result in resilient response to traumatic events. And this is because the research connects stronger feelings of coping capacity with being more solution focused, acting and adopting strategies that produce better outcomes. This happens to be the characteristic of forward thinking. In addition, high levels of coping capacity better enable us to find, cultivate, and maintain social support.
How many times have you heard, "I've got this"? Let's use that to motivate us to practice realistic optimism and seek solutions as opposed to taking the easy way out. We need to seek solutions, and that helps us energize and strengthen the support we need from others. At the same time, the more you practice forward thinking and develop your social support network, the greater your feelings of coping capacity will be, because you will have more resources to call on. And you certainly cannot increase your social support if you don't feel like being around other people. There's definitely a synergistic effect.
Yeah, it's a self-reinforcing loop.
Yes, very much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Again, if you have any questions as we go along, please put them in the chat, and if we don't see them immediately, we'll make sure to address them at some point. When we do our regular resilience skills class, we go into each of these pillars in much greater detail and teach a variety of skills to strengthen each pillar. Because time is limited today, we're going to guide you through 3 activities representing each of the 3 pillars, and you'll be able to use them as part of your behavioral health self-care toolkit. Under the pillar of forward thinking, we're going to do an activity that will help develop your skill of self-compassion. One of the more common thinking traps that can lead to psychological distress is called personalization. And that is, you tend to harshly blame yourself whenever anything goes wrong, regardless of the facts of the situation or regardless of any extenuating circumstances. An antidote to personalization thinking trap is practicing more self-compassion. So self-compassion is essentially being kind and understanding to yourself when confronted with your own personal failings. It involves recognizing your suffering, failures, and frailties as part of a shared human experience.
Okay. Within emergency services, I think it's also important that we talk about the perception of failing, whether it be real or not. I'm sure we've all heard the saying about citizens one, fire department nothing, when we have a fatality. We always seem to take on the responsibility for failure, even though there's nothing we could have done, and we absorb that internally.
Mm-hmm. When you practice self-compassion, you're directing the same kind of charitable feelings toward yourself as you would toward others who are suffering.
Yeah, basically, treat yourself the way you would treat a patient.
Mm-hmm.
We never tell them it's their fault. We just deal with what we have to deal with there.
And people who suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder tend to show high levels of self-criticism, as well as obsessively thinking about negative and upsetting experiences and situations. And we refer to that as rumination. A self-compassionate mindset has been shown to help alleviate self-criticism and rumination, and it acts as a buffer against the impact of negative events. So there are 3 components of self-compassion. The first is self-kindness, which involves providing a warm acceptance, care, and understanding to yourself as opposed to harsh judgment. Think of it as when you take care of an infant, how you might react. Second is mindfulness, and this is simply awareness of your own pain and struggles. And just a moment of mindfulness is all that's needed to be in contact with those painful feelings without, at the same time, not over-identifying with the pain. And the third is a common humanity. This recognizes your connectedness with others who suffer. We're all imperfect, We all suffer at some point or another. And while not all suffering is the same, all suffering is worthy of compassion.
Much of our feelings about failure have roots in embarrassment. You know, I want you to think about the first time you got up to dance as a teenager. How mortified were you when you thought somebody was actually watching what you were doing and that you were going to do something silly? You know, we often blow things out of proportion, thinking that everyone else will see our mistake, when in reality, we're the only ones that ever notice. And mistakes are part of the human experience.
Right. So the exercise we're going to do now is to craft your very own personalized self-compassion mantra. This is a set of memorized phrases that you can repeat silently to yourself whenever you want to give yourself compassion. This mantra, which will be unique to you, is most useful in the heat of the moment when you feel strong feelings of distress arising.
Okay. Karen, having come from emergency services, I think it's important for me to say that the word mantra may be a bit too over the top for the machismo in our profession. You can prefer to think of it as self-talk. Let me give you an example. Believe it or not, I used to run. You'd never notice that if you saw a full picture of me here, not just my talking head. I used to run religiously, and when it got tough, I would just tell myself to make it to the next telephone pole. And when I got to that telephone pole, I would say, just make it to the next telephone pole, and so on until I finished my run. It's usually my way of acknowledging the difficulties, but keeping myself in the game a little bit at a time. I would acknowledge the pain, but just force myself a little bit more. It would be okay.
So the goal is to come up with 4 short sentences that are personal to you to remind yourself to be self-compassionate. The first sentence will acknowledge that you are in pain or having a hard time. For example, I'm suffering right now. The second sentence reminds you that suffering and imperfection are part of the shared human experience, that common humanity we were talking about earlier. You might say, everyone feels this way sometimes. The third sentence shows how you want to give yourself kindness in this moment. I will show compassion for myself the way I would show compassion for anyone in my care, for example. And the final sentence sets a firm intention to be self-compassionate. I will give myself the kindness I need. Okay. Here's an example of a self-compassion mantra that I use for myself. As Mike was saying before, I say, this is my turn in the barrel. Everybody gets a turn in the barrel. This too shall pass, and eventually it's going to be okay. I'm going to give myself a break right now.
That's a good one, Karen. I use something a little different, and anyone who knows me knows that I always say life is good. I'm on the right side of the grass. Everything else is just icing on the cake. This is my way of acknowledging that I've been given another opportunity to do right. So
now it's your turn to come up with your mantra or self-talk for compassion, for self-compassion. So we want you to think of 4 sentences that seem most comfortable for you. And we're going to give you a minute or 2 to think of some ideas for what you want to say. You can follow the format on the slide.
okay, you don't have to write things down if you don't want to. We often have internal conversations with ourselves, which tends to be my strategy more than anything else, where we grant permission to ourselves to have and realize our frailties. Lord knows I'm not perfect. You know, that's not my effigy hanging on the cross. So I guess I have a right to make mistakes. So if you don't mind sharing those internal conversations, what does become your internalized mantra? I see something from Kate Lovelace to everybody. I've often said that, give myself a break, not to be so hard on myself. Absolutely, that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. If you feel comfortable sharing all 4 sentences or just a couple that you come up with, why don't you throw them into the chat so that people can see what you're thinking?
All right. Well, we got the one from Kate. Hopefully we'll see a couple more.
Okay.
Just breathe. You've got this. I like it very much.
That
Very
common
much.
humanity resonates with Kelly.
Oh, very good.
So,
this too will pass.
There you go.
Excellent.
That's a good one.
Right. Right. How many times have you told yourself, no biggie, I'll just give it another shot? I can tell you that does work. Before I got promoted to battalion chief, I wound up taking the promotional exam 5 times. You know, don't give up. It's going to change.
Yeah.
And when it does, the world's going to be good. So
Kim says, just breathe. You've got this. Excellent. So once you have all 4 phrases, or however many you want to use there, and you have them to your liking, what you'll do then is you repeat them to yourself till you memorize them. And the next time you have a difficult experience or you feel some self-judgment creeping in, you can silently repeat that mantra to yourself, or say it out loud if you're alone and don't mind other people hearing. It's just that it's a handy reminder when you're having a tough time and you feel that you're starting to be too hard on yourself.
Okay. All right, refer back to your day in the barrel. You know it's coming. So we tend to give reassurance to our patients it's going to be okay. We're here to help now. So at the same time, you want to make sure you don't overpromise what you can't deliver. Treat yourself as that patient. That's all we're telling you to do. Treat yourself as that patient. Yeah. Change your phrases every so often, just to kind of break it up a little bit. The point is to show yourself some kindness and acceptance for your humanness, just like you would do for somebody under your care.
Mighty like a rose. I like that one. Good one, Karen.
Oh, that's a good one. Yes.
All right. Any questions about this activity? We're going to move on to the next one. We're going to do next an exercise that supports the resilience pillar of coping capacity. And we call this one living your values. By way of background, I first want to talk about character strengths. Character strengths are considered universal positive qualities and values that help define us and lead us to being our best selves. We demonstrate our character strengths through our thoughts, our emotions, our decisions, and our behaviors. In the early part of this century, the 21st century, researchers set out to develop a common language of strengths. And they identified 24 characteristics known as the values in action, or VIA inventory of character strengths. There's a free survey you can take at the link on the slide that can give you a ranking of your strengths based on your answers to a questionnaire. And I encourage you to take that survey on your own time. But for now, we're going to use this list of strengths and interchangeably call them values for our next exercise. Also, a subset of character strengths is called signature strengths. And signature strengths refer to those character strengths or values that are most essential to who we are, that we most identify with, and that make us feel most genuine and authentic. In other words, most like ourselves when we use them. This is because our values reflect what we care about and what gives our lives meaning. My signature strengths from the last time I did the survey came up as love, judgment, and gratitude.
Okay. I actually took the test myself, and it showed, amongst others, my signature strengths were judgment, forgiveness, love of learning, and patience, which I prefer to think of as stubbornness turned inside out.
There you go. Research shows us that when we focus on our top personal values for just a few minutes at a time, when our sense of what's really important to us is in the forefront of our mind, we're less likely to be affected by adverse events. We're better able to cope with stress. In other words, we have increased coping capacity. So this next exercise is designed to help you understand how the things you do in life reflect your values and why those values are important to you, which will equip you to better handle the stress associated with what you do in life.
Okay. These core values, we tend to think of those as being static, and they're not necessarily. They change throughout our lives as different things happen and we absorb different experiences. So as these change, we just have to remember that our core values will change us. That's all part of the human experience. For example, in my family, my valuation of family went up considerably after losing my father, my kid sister, and my mother about 14 months apart over the course of 3 years. So it's down to me and my brother now.
Now, to back up the point that Mike just made, my signature strength of gratitude surfaced for me in a big way after my son had a stroke 9 years ago. He's doing really well, by the way, but he has had to be really resilient to overcome the setbacks that he suffered from the stroke. I was not only so grateful that he survived, but also grateful for the first responders, the medical professionals, his teachers, our coworkers, friends and family, everybody who provided support and their professionalism during that difficult time.
Yeah. We can also decide to take a strength that is not currently high on our list and work on developing it. Okay, look at the list of personal values on the slide. You can choose from this list or just think of a value that is not on the list. It just needs to be important to you in some way. Choose a top value that you perceive that you want to live or aspire to live. You don't have to choose your value. You don't have to tell anybody about it. Just has to make sense to you. Right? Would anybody like to volunteer a value or a strength? You know, if you could write it in the chat, and we'll bring them up. Karen, back to you.
Teamwork, gratitude.
Love it. Gratitude.
It's always a good one.
Yes.
Okay. So humor, very good. Once you have chosen the strength and the value that you want to use for this exercise.
Perspective. I like that.
Next, we want you to make that chosen value into an active and actionable statement of how to live the value, of how you live the value. And we're calling this your value statement. So this slide shows some examples of value statements that correspond to particular signature strengths.
Okay. I won't say how long ago, but I used to work with a master firefighter whose name was Bill Sweeney, and he always claimed it's nice to be nice. And he tried to live that value. And every day he had to be one of the nicest people I ever had the opportunity to work with. Kind man.
So if you feel comfortable doing so, you can share your value statement in the chat to give others an idea of how it's done. Next, we want you to think about how you express this value in your life and how it makes you feel to express the value.
Okay, for example, value statement, seek opportunities for kindness. That's always a pretty good one. For me, I found great satisfaction in participating in Fill the Boot campaign, knowing that I was helping people who were less fortunate. Or, as I've done in the past, volunteer for Christmas in April. I think it goes by a new name now, but it helps everybody have a safe place to live. And I have to tell you, it was one of the most rewarding experiences I've ever had.
One of my value statements has been let creativity in. And when my kids were younger, I volunteered to be a room parent at their school and had a really good time researching and organizing fun activities for my kids and their friends. And that helped me to develop my strength of creativity that I felt I needed to work on.
Right. Karen, we have one from our listeners.
Okay.
Kim Lewis.
Teamwork, to bring all together to do what's needed. Love that.
Yep.
Another value statement of mine is to treat people honestly and fairly. An example of how I've lived that value is that in recent years, I've volunteered as a chief judge at our local precinct during election time. And that gives me a great deal of satisfaction in helping to ensure that everybody who is eligible to vote gets the opportunity to do so. And that satisfies my strength of fairness. It also can put me in a situation where I can solve problems and resolve issues, and that helps me use my strength of judgment. So once you come up with this value statement and you think about how you express it in your life, if you don't mind writing, you can write about it for a few minutes, either by hand or into your computer. And if you don't want to write paragraphs, you can write bullet points. If you don't want to write it all, you can draw, or you can talk about it with someone. Heck, you can even dance about it if that's the way you like to express yourself.
You don't want to watch me dance. All right. The point is to think about these questions with focused attention. The idea is to express the answers in whatever way feels most comfortable. If you feel comfortable doing so, give us an example. Thanks much.
So we do encourage you to write your value statement down and type it or print it out and put it in a place where you can see it often, like either on your desk or in your vehicle, in a mirror, in your bedroom or your bathroom. It's just a reminder for you to live your personal values and the way and how you do it. The next time you want to try this exercise, we suggest that you choose a different value and write about how you express that one in your life. Maintaining perspective can neutralize toxic environments. Very good. That is very true.
Yes.
Okay. So we have put the list of the 24 character strengths and the link to the free VIA survey on this slide. And I just wanted to let you know that in order to take the survey, you're going to need to register with the site, if you don't mind doing that. But just so you're aware too, the site's going to try to get you to purchase a more explanatory version of your survey results that includes ways, different ways that you can use your signature strengths. But that's not necessary in order to get your free report. You have to just look on the website for where it tells you to download your free character strengths report.
Yes. Karen, for our audience here, to increase the benefits of this exercise at some other time, not right now, choose a different top value and follow the same process about developing a value statement and try to do that. And you can do that with any number of the ones that you see as being critical to yourself. Any questions from the audience at this point? It's okay if you don't have them.
That's
You don't have to make them up.
I have a quick.
Oh, sure. Please.
I have a quick question. I didn't want to write in the chat in case it just got misinterpreted, but having different cultures within your work environment and resilience is looked at differently as far as, people's cultures is concerned. How do we, I want to be impactful, but I don't want to be ignorant about how to help people with, come from various cultures. Is there a universal language that can be used to help people start talking more about their resilience techniques?
That's a good question.
That's an excellent question.
Can I give a quick answer, Karen?
Yeah, please.
Sure. All right. Karen Anderson, I think you actually hit on part of it with your comment in the chat room about maintaining perspective. If we acknowledge that none of us has an absolute right to claim the only perspective that's right, and leave room for other people, I think you're better off doing it that way. Everybody has his perspective is shaped by their life experiences, and if we acknowledge those, then we don't have to agree, but we certainly have to consider them. And I think that goes a long way.
And I think just acknowledging that you have a sensitivity to different cultural norms is a really good way to approach somebody. Also with an attitude of curiosity. So asking questions rather than dictating to them and making assumptions from the get-go is a really good way to start that conversation.
Yeah. Kim Lewis said, put something up here. I don't know if everybody can see it, about to go where I am needed to help others when they are struggling, to be a team member or leader. I think that's really an important one also. And Karen Anderson, that might help you a little bit with that question you had. Yeah. Okay. Remember, lead by example.
Thank you so much for that question. All right. So we're going to move on then to our next activity. And as we've learned, character strengths that we've identified in ourselves and used to help us live our values are associated with greater life satisfaction as well as increased coping capacity. And for this next exercise, we're going to use those character strengths again. But this time, you're going to direct your attention outward to help develop the resilience pillar of social support.
Okay. The recognition and appreciation of others' character strengths are associated with more commitment to the relationship and greater relationship satisfaction. This is a practice we call strength spotting. Strength spotting can be used to help develop stronger connections with the people in our environment. It can be used at work, at home, to recognize and praise the actions, accomplishments, and positive qualities of others. Let's face it, we all like to be noticed in a positive way. And if the recognition is genuine, we tend to have good feelings for the people who recognize us. I can give you a good example. My significant other has a green thumb, and I have said more than once that she could make a toothpick grow. You know, she's phenomenal.
Nice. So the key to observing and listening for character strengths in others is to look for their shifts in energy on both the nonverbal and the verbal levels. So nonverbally, we want to look for things like expression of positive emotions, the eyes lighting up, increased use of gestures, positive or engaged posture, which is usually kind of leaning forward, and better eye contact. And verbally, we want to listen for a stronger and more assertive voice, improved speech, vocabulary, and delivery. You know, somebody that when they're using their strengths, they're a little more animated than usual. And here's what that might look like.
Okay. We've all seen those people. We've all met those people. Well, you can tell as soon as you meet them the first time that something's going on, something's behind the scenes that needs help. They mumble, their eyes are cast down, and you can tell they have no self-confidence. We've all run across those people.
Mm-hmm.
They need our help.
So there are 3 steps to effectively spotting strengths in other people. The first is to label it. Name the strength that you notice based on your observations. Second is to explain it. Describe what that person was doing when you noticed the strength. And third, acknowledge it. Express appreciation for the strength you observe and affirm why that strength matters.
Okay, the examples can be general. You know, character strength of humor can be observed in a colleague that always cracks a joke at just the right time to lighten the mood of a situation. Maybe it's related to an ongoing conflict within our teammates, or maybe it's because we're facing a very particularly difficult event. But there's always somebody who seems to manage to crack a joke and kind of lighten the mood a little bit. That's a character strength. What about curiosity? The coworker always asks questions when everybody else seems to be mum and not saying anything. You get the one person that, okay, I got a question, raise their hand, ask something. Yeah, try to keep the group engaged.
This process of strength spotting gives others a chance to think about their behavior in a new and positive way, and to feel that their strengths are noticed and that they matter. You might point out a strength, for example, that the other person takes for granted. And of course, it's important that you're authentic and genuine when you do it.
Okay. I will tell you right now, this is not a behavior that comes easily, not to everybody. Some people it does, myself, it's not. But the more you practice it, like everything else, like we said earlier, you practice it and train with it, and it does become easier. It's important to point out here also, this is not an invitation to insult people, nor is it an invitation to give them a backhanded compliment, the old yes but routine. You know, if you got to put a button there, just keep your mouth shut.
Mike and I would like to now model how strength spotting is done. And you can notice how we label and then explain and then acknowledge the strengths that we observe. All right, I'll start. Mike, I want to call out your strength of honesty. When I ask your opinion, and even sometimes when I don't ask for your opinion, I know I'm going to get valuable feedback and advice. I'm thinking right now about when we decided to do that activity today about the self-compassion mantra, and you were like, that word mantra is not going to go over well with our audience. So even though we decided to use it anyway, we did provide an alternate way to refer to it as self-talk. And anyway, your honesty matters because when you choose to work with somebody, you want to have trust in each other. And your strength of honesty absolutely contributes to the high level of trust that I have in you.
Thank you. I hope I deserve that.
He didn't know that was coming. Every
No,
time
I
we
did
do
not.
this, I pick a different strength.
Hey, every time we practice this, you come up with a new one for me. Well, with regards to Karen, my co-presenter, I have found her to be extraordinarily kind. She's always got a smile for everybody, never has a bad word. And most importantly, when we were putting all this stuff together, she always made sure we were fed. We spent hours and hours and hours at her house, and there was always a really, really good lunch waiting for us. So I like to eat. You know, why not?
Hey, I'm an Italian American, so you have to feed your people.
Okay. The other thing about Karen is she's tenacious. This doesn't come out very often, though we have been working on this project for 4.5 years now, I think, something like that. And we've had a couple of serious setbacks, COVID being one. But she's never given up. Not once has she thrown in the towel.
Okay. Well, thanks, Mike. I do appreciate that a lot. Okay, so now we'd like you to try it or prepare to try it. So first, we want you to think about somebody you'd like to strength spot with in the next day or two. And think about when you might have an opportunity to strength spot them. And once you have that person in mind, if you wouldn't mind mentioning in the chat who you've got in mind. And this is a reminder on the screen of a list of the strengths from the VIA survey. And of course, you can choose any positive quality that you happen to notice in order to strength spot.
Okay. It just does not have to be someone you work with. It can be your spouse, your kid, or your best friend, or just somebody you met on the subway or somewhere. It's just, you know, the person that holds the door open for somebody else.
Okay. Kate's going to strength spot her kids, all of them. That's great.
Good.
Anyone else?
I'm sure everybody likes to hear good stuff from mom.
My parents, good.
Yes.
All right. Patience when you see it. Yeah.
So Kelly, you're honest.
Karen's going to strength spot her chief. Great.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank
They
you.
always like
Thanks
to
for
hear good
sharing.
feedback from the bottom.
So next, think through how you would do the strength spotting. You know, once you've got the who and maybe an idea of when you might do this, what would you say? And you would go through this labeling, what the strength is you've noticed, what they were doing when you noticed it, and appreciate it and say why it matters. And just some notes, jot down some notes or bullet points to remind you of this practice and of your observations.
All right. Then go do it. That's the most important part, whether you do it today, tomorrow, or next week. Just do it. You know, I think that's important. And it's, once you get past the first one, it gets easier after that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we all want to be recognized and seen and valued. When you make somebody else feel good in that way, it really does make you feel good too.
Okay.
Okay.
Aaron, I think that wraps up these 3 exercises. For our audience, there's obviously more to resilience than these 3 exercises, but this kind of gives you a little bit of a taste. You know, we could literally fill up another 8 hours with this stuff, but I don't think they'll let us do that. And so, you know, use and practice tools you develop in this workshop, and you'll begin to strengthen the 3 pillars of resilience, both with yourself and also with others.
Yeah. Remember, you can't help others unless you take care of yourself first. And the reason you're here participating in this workshop or seeing it sometime afterwards is because of your commitment to helping others. So likewise, commit to helping yourself.
Okay. All right. next question, I guess, do your departments have formal peer support programs? You can just nod your head or raise your hand or whatever the case may be. If they don't, I would encourage you to develop one. There's a lot to it. So there's some resources that need to be committed. And if you can't do one within your department, don't be afraid to create a regional team. Spread the resources around a little bit. It might work out a little bit better. Mm-hmm. The other thing to remember about peer support, it doesn't have to be people who are actively riding the apparatus. It could be somebody that's retired. It could be the chaplain, if you have one. It could be a spouse. Sometimes the spouses work well in that capacity. Mm-hmm. So.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Oh, let's see what Karen's saying. Working on your doctorate degree at Baylor, and absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that, and we wish you best of luck with that and look forward to connecting afterwards. Robbie has a question.
Hi, thanks for letting me be a part of this today. I'm Robbie May. I'm the ALS coordinator for the University of Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute. And so this is one of the topics that we are getting a lot of requests for training around mental health. And so it's one of the areas where we're looking at developing some different classes for, especially on the EMS side with mental health, but for resiliency on both sides. And so I'm just curious if there's any resources that you would say are really good for us to look at, or you'd point us in the direction of that we should definitely take a look at. I already bookmarked your website to look there. So.
Oh, okay. Actually, I would love to connect with you after we're done here, and sure. Then we can get a better idea of what you're looking for, and we'll provide you with some leads.
Great. I'll send you my email here in the chat. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Robbie.
To Karen Anderson, congratulations on working on your doctorate. It's a long, hard, trust me, it's not easy.
It took 9 years.
Yeah, it did. It took me 9 years to get through.
Talk about persistence and perseverance.
Can I ask you to reach out to me, and I'll have some contacts for you.
Thank you.
That might be very fruitful for you to talk to.
Thank you. Yes.
Particularly within the area you're looking at.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome.
Okay. And this has been just a taste of the skills and benefits that proactive resilience training can provide for you and your department. So we want to thank you for your time and your attention today. I think we're doing good on coming up against the hour, but I also wanted to remind you that if you fill out our brief evaluation form after our presentation and provide your email address, which we promise we won't share with anybody, we will send you a companion workbook to this presentation that includes the activities we learned today and links to additional information. And I'm going to put it again in the chat. I put it up at the top, but there it is again. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
And look forward to connecting with you offline if you have any questions or follow-ups for us. Okay. Yes.
California Casualty has been endorsed by the MSFA for 10 years for its auto, home, and renter's insurance. It is our honor and privilege to protect those who protect our communities. Happy 10-year anniversary to the members of MSFA. Thank you for all that you do. For more information about our program, please visit www.calcas.com/MSFA. We look forward to seeing you at various local, county, and state events.